Thank you so much, Claudia. It was amazing. I remember when she came in and I was sitting in my guru's area, what we call the jhopri. It's a hut. And when we spoke afterwards, the mixture of relief and utter fatigue was palpable in her. And I remember saying to her, go home, get a good night's sleep, and we'll sit tomorrow. And I remember in your mind the idea that there even was still a tomorrow. It's like, oh wow, tomorrow, okay, great. And so it was a sense of not just determination, but it was really as though you were being pulled and called, and the idea that this woman had come all the way from England with just a newspaper article and was really going ashram to ashram to ashram, but the divine brought us together. So it's a wonderful honor to be here tonight, and I am here for you, for all of you. What I'd like to do, Nishit, do you have a watch? Can you just lend me your watch for a second? Keep an eye on it. Because I want to be able to have time to actually open it up for questions and answers. I'll speak for a while, and then I want to open it up for interaction. Thanks. For interaction, for any questions that you may have, because I'll talk about spirituality and business, spirituality and success from where I'm sitting. But each of you is having your own experience of trying to really marry these concepts that feel so distinct. And I want to be able to also be of not just general service, but even specific service to each of you in whatever you may be going through. So I'll end with enough time that we can open it up for discussion. I want to begin by sharing one of my favorite stories. I love to speak through stories, and one of my favorites is a story of three men who are stranded on a boat in the middle of the ocean. And as happens to most of us when we get in difficult situations, they get stressed and they start fighting with each other, which of course neither helps them conserve their energy nor helps them combine their intellect and their forces to actually come up with a solution. And all it does is create stress and fighting in this boat. So they decide that the solution to this would be to divide the boat into three separate compartments, so that each of the men is going to have his own part, and then they can at least not trouble each other. So of course, they didn't manage to get themselves stranded in the middle of the ocean with duct tape, so they just draw these imaginary lines in the boat so that each man has his third. And after some time, two of the men look over and they notice that a leak has sprung in the third man's part of the boat. And up until then, things had actually become quite calm. Each of the men was content knowing, I have my part of the boat, much like children in their bedrooms. You know, this is my half, that's your half, don't come over the line. So they notice that this leak has sprung, and they panic and they say, stop up the leak, do something, this boat's going to drown, going to sink, we're all going to drown. And the third man very calmly says, oh, don't worry. He says, it's only leaking in my part of the boat. And what I love about that story is that we all understand that imaginary and invisible lines, or no imaginary and invisible lines, a leak in any part of the boat is going to bring the whole thing down. And yet, we live our lives like that. We draw these lines between these different parts of our lives, as you were talking about it. We live two lives. Many of us have even more than two lives. My career life, my family life, my social life, my physical life, taking care of my body physically. And then, of course, there's my spiritual life. And we tend to take very, very good care of certain aspects. My career life, my academic life, my social life, family life. But we tend to let leaks spring in certain parts of that boat. And one of the places where the leaks tend to spring the most frequently is in the spiritual part of the boat. And like that man in my story, it doesn't bother us too much. We tend to just say, oh, well, that's okay, that's just the spiritual part of my boat, as though the rest of it could actually stay afloat. And they really are just these imaginary lines. It doesn't matter where the leak is. We're one. And so whether we are sitting at a desk doing what we would call work, whether we are being with our families, whether we are going to the gym, working out, whether we are at a party socializing with friends, or whether we're sitting and meditating, it's all us. There's no way to divide us. And when we allow a leak to spring, particularly in the spiritual side, what we notice is that even though the other areas may be perfect, fabulous job, top position, good social life, good family life, physically healthy, that nonetheless something feels amiss. And we've got to a point where we almost have an epidemic of just a pervasive sense of dis-ease. There's nothing actually wrong. Our career lives are intact, our academic lives are intact, our social lives are intact, our family lives are intact. We haven't gotten a diagnosis from a doctor of a terminal illness. And yet there's a sense of dis-ease. Something just isn't right. And that's the spiritual part of our boat that's leaking. In the United States, the top 10 medicines that are prescribed in the country are antidepressants, anti-anxiety medicine, sleeping pills, and all different brand names, so you actually end up with 10 medicines because it's a couple of different brands of sleeping pills, a couple of different brands of antidepressants, and Viagra. Literally, this is not a joke, this is true. The top 10 medicines in a country where we've really achieved it all, attained it all. It's where most of the rest of the world looks to say, yeah, recent events notwithstanding, nonetheless, a country where they've achieved success. That which on the level of success one would want to achieve, we tend to look there and say, yeah, the pinnacle of that level of success. And yet, it's a country full of people needing to take pills to fall asleep at night, another pill to drag ourselves out of bed in the morning, or to convince ourselves that it's worth dragging ourselves out of bed in the morning, pill to procreate. Mahatma Gandhiji said so beautifully, he said, what's the point of running so fast when we're running in the wrong direction? And that's what's really happening in this external focus on business and success, in the model that most of us have been born and raised in, is that it's forsake your spirituality, forsake your family, forsake your physical health, hours and hours and hours in the office because you've got to get ahead. And then, of course, once you get ahead, well, what's the point of getting ahead? Well, eventually you'll become the VP and then the president, and then you'll have it all, and then you'll actually have time to go to the gym, spend it with your family, meditate, but first you should sacrifice decades of your life getting there so that by the time you get there, you can't actually even enjoy that because you have got high blood pressure and cholesterol and diabetes and all of a whole other array of things that go wrong in our lives as really symptoms of just a system that's gone awry, a system that's out of balance. So, that being said, let's talk about spirituality and business. What does it mean? What does it look like? Why do it? Why bother? Why not just have two separate lives? Why bring them together? Well, there's two reasons. It's good for us, and it's good for our business. Let's start with us. The more amount of time in our day that we can be committed to and dedicated to and engaged in a spiritual practice, the better off we are. Study after study after study after study has shown that whether you're interested in finding peace, finding joy, finding emotional health, finding psychological health, having good coping skills, or whether you're just interested in being physically healthy and living long, that actually spirituality has the key to all of that. They did a study recently at Duke University, which is one of the top universities in America and a very research-based university. And it was a longitudinal study where they watched people for 20 years. And they measured, the goal was to see what factors in life contribute to longevity. But typically what they were looking for was things like dietary patterns, exercise patterns, these sorts of things. And at the end of 20 years, they found something really remarkable. That holding diet constant, exercise constant, smoking, drinking, drug use constant, holding everything else that we already know contributes to health and longevity, holding all of that constant, one thing contributed very, very significantly to whether people were going to live or going to die during the course of the study. And that one thing was how regularly they attended a place of worship. People who regularly attended a place of worship were 25% less likely to die of any cause during the 20 years of the study than people who didn't. And remember, we've just held smoking, drinking, exercise, diet constant. So it's not, well, our pastors and priests and rabbis tell us not to drink, not to smoke, not to eat fried foods. It's not that. We've held all of that constant. Then they thought, well, maybe it's just the social support. Then they looked at people in all sorts of other clubs, country clubs, tennis clubs, other sorts of community groups. Held all of that constant. It still was just people who regularly attended a place of worship. And to this day, they don't know exactly what it is. But what they no longer can deny is that actually being part of a religious, spiritual community, but it's not enough to just be part. People who were simply members of a church or synagogue or temple or gurdwara and paid their membership bills did not actually derive any benefit. You had to actually show up. So people who actually regularly attended were 25% less likely to die of anything during the 20 years. Dartmouth University, another top, not only research-based university, but medical institution, did a slightly different but similar study where they took in patients who had come in after having had a heart attack. And on the intake form, along with all of the other intake questions, they asked one question. And that question was, how religious or spiritual are you? And there were three choices: not at all, somewhat, or very. And what they found was that 6 months after admission, people who had selected either not at all or somewhat, 11% of them had died from a second heart attack. Now, if you go back and look at figures, that's normal. Typically between 10 and 15% of people will die within 6 months of the first heart attack from a second heart attack. But people who had said they were very spiritual or religious, any guesses? What percent had died? 0. Not 1. So again, they're not yet sure what the mechanism is. Science takes a little while to catch up. They're stuck in their own boxes. But the numbers don't lie, and they can't deny the numbers. So what we know is that obviously being spiritual brings us peace. Anyone in here who's ever meditated knows what you feel like after you meditate compared with what you felt like before you meditated. So we all know that it brings about inner peace, it brings about inner joy, it reduces our anxiety. We also now know that it actually increases our health and longevity. So it's good for us. But we also know it's good for our business. All over the world, corporations with increasing speed are bringing spirituality into the workplace. Because what they have found is not just does it make their employees happier, most employers aren't too worried about that, but it actually makes them more productive. At Apple headquarters in California, they actually have 30 minutes in which, on company paid time, every employee has 30 minutes for meditation. They're being paid to meditate. Now, when you look at how much these people are making per hour, and therefore how much Apple is investing in not health insurance, nothing like that, but actually making their people, or suggesting to them, recommending to them, creating the time for them to meditate. Apple, Google, Yahoo, IBM, McKinsey, so many of them, I'm just naming the ones that come immediately to my mind, have meditation classes and programs in their companies. They're taking employees out of their desks on company time and putting them into meditation classes. Business Week magazine recently ran a story actually based on a study by McKinsey on a direct linear relationship between the spirituality of their employees and productivity and decreased turnover. So people who are spiritual are not only more productive, but you're less likely to have employee turnover, which everyone who's an employer knows decreases your company's productivity, because again, you're bringing in new people, you're training them, you're getting adapted to them, they're getting adapted to you. You're much better off with employees who actually stay with the business year in and year out, especially if their productivity is increased. So it's good for us, it's good for the company, it's a win-win situation. But what does it look like? How do we bring it in? What does it mean? What does it mean particularly in places where we're really sure not to talk about religion? Not to bring in anything that would make anybody feel uncomfortable, or anything that would even touch upon discrimination or pressure. What does bringing spirituality into the workplace look like? Well, the word spirituality literally means of the Spirit, pertaining to the Spirit. That's all it is. Our materialistic viewpoint says, this is who I am. I end here, there's this empty space. You start there, you end there, there's empty space. He starts there, he ends there. That's our materialistic view. Keeps us separate from each other in our relationships. And in business, it turns us into an me versus you, us versus them, what they call the sort of dog-eat-dog world. We're separate. There's only one number one, there's only one raise, there's one promotion, there's one president, one CEO. It's either you or me. You and I are separate. Spirituality says no. That same spirit that flows through me flows through you. There's no place I end. Talk to a molecular biologist. All you've got to do is put us under a good high-powered microscope to know that there's no border to where I end. To our eyes that aren't able to see at the level of, the electron microscopes, I look pretty solid. Looks like there's a good border here. But if you put me under an electron microscope, what you're going to see is just a whole bunch of really quickly moving electrons. We're bundles of energy. And a spirit runs through us. And so when we talk about spirituality, all we mean is bringing an awareness of spirit, of oneness, of that which connects us and unites us rather than that which separates us into our lives. And it's something that in our meditation time, in our what we would call spiritual life outside of the workplace, we gather it up, we charge our batteries. But then it should be something that stays with us into our workplace, into our careers, into whatever we do. My guru, Puja Swamiji, has a beautiful teaching that he gives that I want to share with you all tonight. And the teaching is, engage yourself in karma. It's a three-phrase teaching. So I'll give it to you in one piece and then I'll go back and talk about them individually. Engage yourself in karma under the shade of Dharma with an awareness of Brahma. And that's anybody who comes to him with any question about how to make it in the world, how to succeed in the world, how to bring my spirituality into the world. This is the teaching. Engage yourself in karma under the shade of Dharma with an awareness of Brahma. And I want to just take a minute and look at each of these individually. So we say, engage yourself in karma. Well, what does that mean? What is karma? Karma means action. The law of karma, when we talk about the law of karma, has to do with what I do comes back to me. But the actual word of karma means action. And when we talk about engaging in karma, it means engage yourself in right action, righteous action. But spirituality is not to do nothing. I grew up in California, where in the New Age movement, people like to talk about the fact that we're human beings, we're not human doings. And, so there's a lot of emphasis on the sort of beach enlightenment of, I'm not supposed to be doing. Doing takes me out of being, and I'm just going to sit here on the sand until I get enlightened. And it doesn't seem to work. I haven't met anybody there who's actually gotten it. And The option, though, the alternative from which they're running, and from which so many people run, I just happen to have been exposed to it in the form of beach-going Californians, is the opposite is the doing, forgetting that there is a being who's actually present and witnessing the doing. So neither of them is the answer. God has given us intelligence, creativity, initiative, compassion. And I've got such a faith in God that I don't believe that He would give us anything just for the sake of us learning how to throw it away. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, from any religious perspective, any spiritual perspective. It doesn't make sense that the Creator, regardless of what name, what form, what gender, genderless, genderful, however we envision the Creator, would give us gifts for the sole purpose of us spending our lives learning to ignore them. So if we've been given intelligence, abilities, creativity, initiative, compassion that makes us cry when we see starving children or people being oppressed, the answer cannot be that we should spend our lives learning how to just sit on a beach and be happy regardless of what's going on in the world around us, not using our intelligence, not using our creativity, not using our initiative. So what's the happy medium? What's the balance? What is that karma, that right action? Well, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about karma yoga. And what's so important about this, and why I bring it up here, is that yoga means union. Now, to most of us, yoga means standing on our heads in, sports bras and spandex. But actually what the word yoga means is union. And it's a union of ourselves to the divine. But the divine isn't just up there in heaven. The divine is here. And so it's a union of ourselves to all of creation. So karma yoga, which is what we're told in the Bhagavad Gita, is the right action, correct action, is action which unites us, or action done with an awareness of that union. So nowhere are we being told, stop acting, sit. We're being told act, but act through union, of union, with an awareness of union. So it's no longer me versus you. It's not I will step on your head to get ahead. Success at all costs. Promotion at all costs. Profit at all costs. So suddenly, the people working in slave labor conditions in third world actually employ people who were working regular hours and getting regular benefits. Suddenly that profit no longer feels like a profit. Because suddenly the women and the children working in sweatshops are also part of us. Because that union doesn't have borders and boundaries. So it's not just about I should be united with my colleagues. I mean, that's a good place to start. We have to start somewhere. So we start with that which is near. But we don't end there. The people who are producing that which we're selling. the people who are picking the cotton in the fields that we are spraying with all sorts of pesticides and chemicals in order to have a higher profit because we don't want to go organic. They're getting cancer, their families are getting cancer. Suddenly, all of how we operate in business and in the world starts to shift. So whether it's the perspective of actually in our workplace, whether it's in the perspective of what we consider profit, whether it's in the perspective of what we consider income and how we spend that income. So we're standing in the aisle of a supermarket choosing between 50 different brands of shampoo or 50 different brands of cereal. Suddenly it's no longer just about which brand is going to keep the most money left in my pocket. But it's about which one actually was produced with an awareness of our union. So suddenly things like organic and fair trade and vegetarian, suddenly these concepts start to become crucial aspects of business policies, of HR policies, of how we shop, what we buy, how we live, what choices we make in the workplace and outside of the workplace. Under the shade of Dharma, so that was engage yourself in karma, we're acting. But whatever we're doing it out of the awareness of union. It's yoga then. So then even if sometimes we can't actually make it to our yoga class, we're able to practice yoga in whatever we're doing. Because that same divinity to which we are connecting in our yoga classes or our meditation classes exists everywhere. Under the shade of Dharma. What is Dharma? Well, we could do an entire, weekend workshop on what Dharma is, but I want to be quick about it. For the sake of where I'm going tonight, Dharma is the right path, the right way. It tends to be described as a way of life, but a righteous way of life. Now, there's two pieces to Dharma. There's what we call universal Dharma, and then there's individual Dharma. So universal Dharma is things like honesty, integrity, compassion, generosity. But individual Dharma has to do with what is my right way, my right path. And so what we are doing, we may term success to be the multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire businessman or doctor or engineer or lawyer. But if at heart what we really are is a painter, then it doesn't matter how our bank statement keeps increasing and increasing and increasing and increasing, we are not going to feel satisfied. Because we know that that's not what we were put on earth to be doing. So individual Dharma says, your brother, your father, your friend may really be put here on earth to be a doctor. May, from the time he or she was young, have done play surgeries and play operations, and for Halloween was a doctor in scrubs. And that's wonderful. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's my path. Maybe for me, all I wanted to do since I was young was be a teacher. And I used to play by putting all my dolls on the floor and teaching to them. Or maybe I wanted to be a painter or a musician. And when we talk about success, success really is what brings us joy. I mean, that's what success is, right? How do we measure success? I mean, if I took a break here and I said, okay, give me measures of what success is, at the bottom of everything, what we'd find is joy and happiness. That's what we're looking for. A piece of paper from our bank that tells us that we've got, $1 trillion is useless unless that makes us feel happy. Unless we can do something with that $1 trillion to feel happy. So individual dharma means that I need to not let myself get so indoctrinated by what in Indian culture we call Maya, this illusion of our culture that says, oh, you'll be happy if you can just become the CEO. You'll be happy if you be the president. You would be happy if you too had $1 million and a house in this area of town and this type of car. When inside we actually know that we're really much happier doing something else. So individual dharma means having the courage to find our own success. And even if it doesn't necessarily put as much in our bank account as somebody else's, to know that that's our success. Because at the end of the day, we don't need a pill to go to sleep. We don't need a pill to drag ourselves out of bed in the morning. There's nothing in spirituality that says you can't be phenomenally wealthy. There's nothing that says that wealth and spirituality can't go together. They can. The issue is who the person is, who we are, who has the wealth. It's not about the wealth, it's about me. In the very famous epic of the Ramayana, there's a king in the Ramayana, a demon king named Ravan, who, again, I won't go into the details of this, but let's just leave it at the fact that he's a demon. He's a king, but he's a demon. He's the bad guy of the Ramayana. And Lord Ram goes to Lanka and they actually end up vanquishing the army. Anyway, the point is, Ravan is a king, and Lanka, his city over which he ruled, was a city made of gold. Lord Krishna, the embodiment of the divine, at a certain stage in his embodiment in human form, was also a king. He was a king of a city called Dwarka. Dwarka was also a city made of gold. So what we've got in looking at our spiritual epics is examples of two cities of gold. One ruled over by a demon, the other ruled over by the divine. So it's not the gold. It's not that when Krishna became king of Dwarka, he suddenly melted all of the gold and, made everything only out of mud. There can very easily be gold and wealth along with the spirituality. It's all about what's inside of us. What do we do with that wealth? How do we view that wealth? Do I view that wealth as the key to my happiness? Or do I view that wealth as a tool I've been given to serve the world? And the last point about Dharma that I want to mention is that living under the shade of Dharma really means that we're focused on our lives and our paths, not on the rest of the world. so much of what goes wrong in our lives, what brings us pain in our lives, what brings despair in our lives, and of course what brings pain in the lives of others and the society, is how focused we are on what other people are doing, judging others, condemning others, gossiping about others, putting others down, backstabbing others. And living under the shade of Dharma means that we're committed and focused on our path. When my guru was young, he tells a beautiful story of when he was very young and he had first come to the ashram. There was this other very elderly and very revered saint who used to come to the ashram to give talks. But instead of staying at the ashram, he stayed in this little hut on the banks of Ganga, some ways away. And it was Puja Swamiji's duty every day to go and pick him up from where he stayed and bring him back to the ashram for his talk and then to escort him back afterwards. And in India, for those of you who have been there, it's crowded. And where we are, there's a pathway in front of the ashram that's crowded, and there's everything ranging from cows to fruit sellers to dogs to pedestrians to everything. And it's a very, very narrow pathway. And so when he would walk this saint back to the ashram, he always was very, very sure to clear the way for him. He would push everything out of the way, all of the cows, all of the donkeys, all of the fruit sellers. Side, 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 please, 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 side, 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 side. And they get to the ashram, and he was very proud of himself that he had managed to clear this beautiful, perfect, unimpeded path for the saint to walk on. And the saint looked at him and he said, "Who in your life, how many are you going to keep pushing out of the way?" He said, "That's not the way to live. The way to live is just to make your own path. Don't worry about the donkeys and the cows and the fruit sellers and this pedestrian and what that person's doing and getting this one out of the way and getting that one out of the way. Success is making your own way. Through the donkeys, through the cows, through the fruit sellers, through the pedestrians, through the people asleep. That's the real path." So when we commit ourselves to Dharma, it's a path of checking ourselves, of that almost constant, almost even subconscious judgment and condemnation of others, and bringing the awareness back to ourselves. Where am I on my path? How clear is my path? Not getting stuck with this donkey on the road, or getting stuck with this cow on the road, but clearing our own path. And lastly, with an awareness of Brahma, well, Brahma means God, the divine. And again, it doesn't matter what name, what form, how we envision the divine. With form, without form, with name, without name, it doesn't matter. But living our lives with that awareness of the divine. We're told in our scriptures that everything in the universe is pervaded by the divine. There is nothing in the universe that is not pervaded by the divine. And if that's true, then it's like what I was saying before. That same spirit flows through all of us. And that same divine who I worship in my spiritual life, when I'm in temple, at church, in the synagogue, at the mosque, in the gurdwara, that same divine is present everywhere, because we've been not only created by the Creator, but we've been created of the Creator. And if we've been created of the Creator, then everyone and everywhere becomes an opportunity to practice spirituality. My employers, my employees, my co-workers, our suppliers, the parking guys, everyone becomes an opportunity to see the divine, and that becomes my spiritual path. Can I see that same divine in everyone? Because that's what we're told. I mean, I've quoted so much from the Hindu and Indian tradition, but in the Christian tradition, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we're told, love thy neighbor as thyself. Jesus Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, what does that mean? You can't really love someone as yourself until you see that person as yourself. As long as I see myself as different from you, I will never love you the way I love myself. To love thy neighbor as thyself means to see thy neighbor as thyself. And if I see my neighbor as myself, then in every interaction with that neighbor, I have a chance to practice my spirituality. I might as well be in charge. So wherever we are, it becomes a practice in spirituality. Bringing spirituality into business or into the workplace means that we actually have to redefine success. Because up until now, as I said earlier, success has been me versus you. But suddenly we have to now redefine success, because spirituality tells us that it's not how much we accumulate. It's who we are. It's how we live. So suddenly success is no longer about the corner office, or the raise, or the promotion. There has to be a new definition of success. And that new definition of success has to be something that's real. So what is it? What is success? Well, I have a friend who's a doctor, and he says something very funny. He says, people come to me and they're sick, and he's a very, very spiritual man, and he says, people come to me when they're sick, and they say, doctor, fix me, heal me, give me medicine or an operation or whatever. And he says, I always ask them, why do you want to get well? And they always say, well, so I can go back to work. And he says, well, why do you want to go back to work? And they say, well, so that I can earn more money. And he says, well, why do you want to earn more money? Well, because if I earn more money, then I'll be able to have a bigger house. And he says, well, why do you want to have all those things? He says, because then I'll actually be able to take a vacation with my family, take some time off. And so my friend always laughs, and he says, it's so funny because in math, we're always told that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. And yet, in our lives, we run the distance between 2 points like this. I'm here, where I want to be is happy, peaceful, to have time to spend with my family, to have time to meditate. But what path do I take from here to there? The farthest, most circuitous route I can possibly take, hoping that at some point I'm going to end up at that spot. And what he always tells them, and he loves this, and he says this is why I always ask the question, so I actually get the chance to tell them this, is if instead of wanting to get well so you could go back to work, you wanted to get well so you could have time with your family and meditate, you wouldn't be sick in the first place. success, and of course, that doesn't mean you're never going to be bit by a mosquito that has malaria. I mean, he's obviously made a generalization, but it works. It gets people's attention. And it makes us reevaluate where we're going and what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so suddenly what we realize is that success really is just a way to find joy, to find peace. And then we ask ourselves, well, what is it that brings me joy? What is it that makes me feel peaceful? And what we find is that in our lives, the thing that brings us joy across the board is a connection. Whether it's a connection to a nameless, formless God, whether it's a connection to God in form, in a traditional form, or whether it's connection to our loved ones, whether it's connection to our children, whether it's connection to the tree that grows in our backyard, whether it's connection to the sunset, connection to our pet. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is the connection, is that we've been connected to something outside of ourselves. Something that has dissolved these boundaries and borders of what I identify as self. And that brings us to the last point that I want to mention, which is another name for that, is love. That's what we call that connection. Whether it's what we feel when we see the sunset, whether it's what we feel when we look in the eyes of a child or our loved ones, whether it's what we feel when we pray, we meditate, we go to temple, church. That's what we call that connection. And that love is actually what it all becomes about. We tend to have limited our concept of love to just a spouse or a child or a parent or a handful of people. But really what it becomes about, what the real success is the expansion of that love. And that's what the fruit of the union is, because as you're united with someone, love blossoms. When we unite, when we become one, that's what love is. There's no more place where I end and you begin. When we're joined in love, either physical, romantic love, or spiritual love, when we're joined in love, where I end and where you begin is, I no longer could tell you where it is. There's a beautiful story that I'll conclude with of a woman, and she's home alone, and there's a knock on her door, and she opens her door, and there's 3 men standing on her porch, and she says, oh, and they're elderly men. She says, please come on inside. And they say, is your husband home? And she says, no, he's off, but he'll be back in the evening. And they say, no, we'll wait then. We'll wait outside until he comes home. Just let us know when he comes home. So they turn to walk to sit in the front yard, and as they turn, one of them says to her, by the way, my name is Love, and with me are success and wealth. When your husband comes home, ask him which of us he wants to invite into the house, because actually we can't all come inside. Only one of us can come inside. So when your husband comes home, ask him which of us he would like to invite in the house. Love or success or wealth, and that one will will enter. So she says okay, and her husband comes home and their daughter comes home, and she tells them about what happened. And so the husband says, oh, well, I think we should definitely invite success in, because if we invite success in, then our son is going to get into the university that he's wanting to go to, and then he'll get a great education and a great job. And she says, but honey, the whole point of all of that is just so that he has a good job and becomes wealthy. So don't you think it would make more sense that we just invite success in? Then it's irrelevant, that we just invite wealth in, then it's irrelevant whether he gets into the university or not, because we'll already be wealthy. So the husband says, yeah, you're right, actually. Okay, so instead of success, we'll invite wealth in. And their daughter says, Mom, Dad, I appreciate how much you want to care for me and my brother, but really all we want is love in the family. So if you think it's okay, could we please just invite love in, and whether he gets into the university or not, whether he gets the job or not, as long as we all have love, that's what'll be most important. So her parents are, of course, very humbled and touched by their daughter's wisdom, and the mother goes out and she says, okay, which of you is love? And one man stands and she says, you can enter the house. We've made a decision that we will invite love into the house. And love stands up and starts to walk up onto the porch into the house, and behind him the other two stand and follow. And as love enters, the woman holds up her hand and she says, stop, you said only one could enter, and we've chosen love. And they say, well, if you had chosen success or wealth, he would have had to enter alone. But actually, wherever love goes, success and wealth always follow. And so all three of them enter the house. And whether we mean love for a family member, love for the divine, love for ourselves, and it's all the same, because you can't actually love someone else until you love yourself. And when you really love yourself, when you really, really love yourself, it's loving God. Because you can't actually love yourself without loving God. Because the minute we really understand who we are, and how very fallible we are, and how very weak we are, and how much ego we have, and how much anger and jealousy, and deeply and truly and purely and completely, in the face of all of that, the only way to do it is because we love God who made us, and with the awareness that by loving us, we're loving Him, and by refusing to love ourselves, we're not loving Him. Because as I said, we've been made not just by the Creator, but of the Creator. So if we can't love ourselves, we can't really love God. So it doesn't matter where we start. Ultimately, love, when it's full and whole, becomes love of God, love of the self, and then love of all of the reflections of the self. And that's what brings our success. And that's what brings our wealth on every level. Because of course, wealth in the bank, as we all know, is useless, and success at the sake of others is useless. I mean, we couldn't feel satisfied with success when others are starving. I mean, we can't gorge ourselves on a meal and allow others to starve, or build a palace while others are homeless, and actually feel good about the success. So we begin with love. And from that, the right action follows. And when the right action follows, it's sure to be a success. And then whether the wealth is in the form of pounds in our bank account or fulfillment in our lives, or both. We've been successful. And we sleep at night, and we rise each day with joy and gratitude and excitement. Ask anybody on their deathbed, and what they would all tell you is, I'd give every penny that I had for another day, to see another sunrise, to take another walk through the park. So we don't want to wait until we get on our deathbeds to realize what success really is. Thank you. We've got, I think, about 20, 25 minutes or so, 30 minutes for questions that anyone may have on anything I said, something I didn't say, you wish I'd said, anything in your life that, yes.
Firstly, thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask, if you practice all these things, you know, being full of love and all these other things that I've learned, how do you cope when you're surrounded by people who aren't that? It's wonderful being in this room, it's wonderful at the ashram, you know, it's, you know, wonderful, you know, these wonderful events, but when you're surrounded by people who aren't full of love or who are very negative, how do you, they're not very spiritual, how do you deal with that?
Great question. She's asked, you know, it's great in this room, in the ashram, she's been to our ashram in Rishikesh, but when we are trying to be embodiments of love, and live in love, what about the rest of the world when they're not living out of love and there's so much negativity? How do you cope with that? How do you deal with that? There's 2 points on this that I want to talk about. The first is how we get affected by it. We really have a choice of, you know, my guru talks about junk mail, and he says, you know, every day in your email, in your inbox, now with spam filters it's somewhat better, but there was a period of time in which every time I went to log in, at least 50% of the messages were, you know, all sorts of solicitations for God knows what, criticisms of various body parts of mine and their size, people trying to sell you things, you know, profanity. And yet, what do we do when we see that? We delete it. Most of the time, even from the subject line, you don't even have to open it, you can delete it. And on the rare occasion that someone comes up with a subject line that you don't realize is spam, you open it, and then the minute that you see the profanity or whatever, you delete it. It doesn't affect us. We understand it's just junk. Some guy or some lady in some city or country somewhere in the world has done a computer program that's just sending this stuff out. We happen to simply have been the unlucky recipient with some server, some portal, some IP address that it ended up coming to. But it doesn't ruin our day. It doesn't even ruin a minute. And in life, that which comes at us, that negativity, is really that same junk mail. We take it very personally. But it's really just, people who are happy and full of love are not hurting others. When you're feeling connected to the divine, to love, when you're loving yourself, the last thing you want to do is hurt somebody. And if by mistake you do, you're going to be the first to say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's not what I meant. How can I fix it? How can I make it up to you? So if someone is spewing negativity or is hurting people, you can rest assured that they're unhappy. It's coming from confusion, from fear, from anger, from sadness. People are doing, as hard as it is to believe, the very best that they can with what they've been given. And what many people have in their toolbox is anger, resentment, fear, bad habits, poor coping skills, lack of trust, abandonment. And so out of that toolbox, they're spewing junk mail. Get close enough, it's going to land up in your inbox. But that doesn't mean that it was actually meant for you. And so the key becomes, how can we just delete it the way that we delete the junk that shows up in our email boxes, without taking it personally? Oh my God, really? You think mine are too small? You think I need to own this or have this? We don't take it personally. We understand this guy's never seen me. Who's sending us this junk email? We know that he's not actually judging us and sending emails based on that. And the same way with people around us. Their negativity is their illness, their dis-ease. We delete it and we move on. I mean, it's not that we get spam and so we refuse to turn on our computers. We would never say, oh no, I can't go near my inbox today because there's going to be profanity in my spam folder. Doesn't bother us. We're still going to check our emails. We're still going to do whatever we have to do. So in the same way, with people around us, with negativity in the world around us, what we have to realize is it's negative because people are suffering. But the result of that should not be that we take that suffering in personally. We help where we can help. We spread positivity where we can spread positivity. The Buddha said something beautiful about becoming an ocean. No, a river, sorry. Becoming a river of compassion, into which flames of people's anger just gets doused. It's not about going out and fighting the fire, or condemning the fire, or running from the fire. It's about becoming the river into which the fire can't live anyway. The minute that fire touches the river anyway, it's going to be extinguished. So how can we become those rivers? The other point that I do want to mention about that, though, is that there are times in life in which we have a choice, in which there are certain circumstances and situations and relationships in which the negativity is very, very strong. And we actually do have a choice. And even though ultimately the goal is to become the river into which the fire of anger and negativity is doused, in many cases, it's just a lot easier to get out of the situation. The amount of energy and effort that we have to expend, breathing deeply, deleting the junk mail, reminding ourselves, it's a lot. And wherever possible, if we can remove ourselves from places, from environments, from situations in which we're going to be surrounded by that, because ultimately, as I said earlier, we're energetic beings. And so people's energy impacts us. And it takes a lot of re-energizing to maintain that level of literal vibrations inside of us. And so wherever you can protect yourself from that negativity, by all means, protect yourself. If it means taking a different way to work, if it means shopping somewhere else, if it means not going to certain parties, if it means whatever it means. Adjust your life as much as possible to be in places where the vibrations support you. And then where it's not possible, just envision yourself as that river and think about that which is coming in as just junk mail. And can you just see it, recognize it, delete it, and move on? Yes.
Hi, thank you again for that's very inspiring. One of the things on that man, I say man, but obviously human beings in general, what it is with capitalism is that we don't want more money. Actually, what we want is more freedom. And it's the freedom that we strive for. And within that freedom is actually the ability, obviously, to make choices. And that's what really drives us. It's not capitalism, but it's progression. So in the Western world, what we see is our bank account and the money going up every time because it's tangible and it's easy for us to see. And it gives us an idea that we are being successful because last week I had £100, now I have £200. What is intangible is your spirit, is your soul, and all the recordings that you get on your soul by doing good deeds. Because we don't actually see them, we don't see progression, and therefore we don't chase it. So the question is, one of the things that Martin Luther said and really sticks out to me is, he said, everybody has the power to be great because everybody has the power to serve. And we all have the power to serve. So when we're living in our business lives and everyday lives, one of the questions I have is, people think I'm a bit crazy at work because I do all this stuff. But like, you know, in a normal working environment, you sit in a meeting and you do like a really good job. And my director, finance director, sat with me once and he said, probably I'm really proud of you. You know, this report was almost 100% excellent because I love it and I've never seen it like this before. And I said, actually, Kevin, name. I said, it wasn't me, it was Anne Law who did most of the work, it wasn't actually myself. And he sat back in shock. And he said, because it's unbelievable, because in all my life, I've never heard somebody actually just admit that it wasn't my credit. So my question is, how do you take practical steps in real life world, which is following on from your question, where people actually understand this level of spirituality, which can actually grow the business and increase profitability in the long run, because you connect with your customers, and it's all to do with fairness and equality. But how do you then take practical steps in real life business context where you can actually live the spiritual life and we don't have a mutually exclusive, but we actually can, include both margin spirituality and success?
Okay. I'm not going to repeat the question. I actually heard two questions there. One was your question about that actually what we're looking for is freedom, not striving for capitalism in terms of more money, but actually the end result is freedom. And then the second being the practical steps. You're absolutely right that what we're striving for is freedom. But freedom from what? We're not anymore striving for freedom to rule ourselves, freedom to vote, freedom to marry whomever of whatever gender, whatever culture we want to. Every year we're getting more and more freedoms, both every year in terms of society as well as every year in our lives as we grow up. Now we have the freedom to drive, we have the freedom to vote, we have the freedom to drink, we have the freedom to have our own apartment, whatever. What we're actually looking for is freedom from that which binds us. And this is exactly what I was saying, but it's great that you raised the question of the word freedom. Joy comes only when you're free. When we are a slave, whether it's a slave in the traditional sense of the word of you've got a master, or whether it's a slave to our own endless desires, or it's a slave to our subconscious programming that says you're worthless, you're useless, you're this, you're that, whether it's a slave to what society is expecting of us. whether it's a slave to our own minds that just keep chattering and won't stop, whether it's a slave to our own desires, our hunger, our greed. The freedom that we're looking for is a freedom from that. And that's really what enables us to be free. Because I can have every right in the book. I can drive, I can vote, I can drink, I can marry whomever I want, I can go wherever I want, I can buy whatever I want. Give me $1 trillion, there's nothing that I want that I can't buy. I can do everything, full freedom. But if I'm still being ruled by my own grudges or my anger or my jealousy or my pain from the past, I'm not free. So the freedom that we need and the freedom that brings that joy is the freedom actually from our inner chains that bind us, not from the outer chains. There's no amount of money that's going to make you free. And there's no lack of money that's going to make you a slave. There are plenty of stories, many of which I've actually witnessed in my own life, many of which are part of our, spiritual tradition, of beggars, of cobblers, who were far more enlightened than the kings. So it's not about I need a certain amount of money to be free. There's a great story of, I think it might have been Napoleon. One of the great conquerors, I think it was Napoleon, who had gone to India and conquer, wanting to see everything, conquer everything wherever he was. And, you know what? It was Alexander. And had gone to India and was wanting everything. And he noticed that there were these yogis. And he had heard that these yogis have great powers and everything. And so he tells his people, his men, bring me back a yogi. I want one of these yogis because I want to know their secrets. So his staff go out in search of a yogi, and they find one under a tree in meditation, and the soldier stands in front of him and he says, "Are you a yogi?" And the yogi says something that implies, "Yes, I am." I'm sure he didn't just say, "Yeah, I'm a yogi." But the soldier understood, yes, he's a yogi. And he said, "I have to bring you back to our king. He wants you and he'll give you everything." And the yogi doesn't want to go. And so the soldier starts trying to, not bribe him, but induce him. We'll give you all of the money, we'll give you riches, we'll give you, you'll be in the kingdom, you'll have a castle, you'll have a palace, you'll have everything. And the yogi says, "There's actually really only one thing I want from you." And so he becomes very happy, thinking, well, that's great, maybe at least now there's one thing I can give him and he'll come with me. And he says, yes, tell me anything. He says, "Could you just move a little bit this way?" He says, "I was getting this great sunshine, and you've come and you've stood right in front of my sunshine, and the one thing that I had, you've taken it away from me." He says, "I don't want anything you have. Just leave me back where I was. I was better off before you came. Now I'm in the shade." That's freedom. That's the freedom we want. The second question. Practical steps of bringing that spirituality in the workplace. Well, we all want a sort of cookie cutter type of approach in which I can say, well, okay, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but how you're going to bring spirituality in the workplace is going to depend on, are you the employer? Are you the employee? Do you run a business that's got suppliers from all over the world. Are you a gas station attendant? Are you a waitress? I mean, everybody in their workplace is going to bring spirituality in a completely different way. The 5 steps I would give a CEO of a multinational company are going to be very different from the 5 steps I would give a gas station attendant. Not because one is better than the other, but just because their challenges are different. They're interacting with the world in a different way. But what I've said in terms of operating with, go back to Puja Swamiji's mantra of engage in karma. So karma yoga, we're working with an awareness of union. Union of ourselves to the divine. Union of ourselves to the world. So on a practical level, there's going to be fairness. There's going to be equal opportunity. There's not going to be cheating. There's nobody's head to step on to get ahead that isn't my head. Nobody's going to be deprived of proper wages, proper health care, proper working conditions. Because I'm united with them. They're part of myself. We're going to keep acting. Engage yourself in karma. So we're going to keep doing. Keep serving. Under the shade of Dharma, we're going to work with integrity, with honesty. You know, for those of you who do yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga that Patanjali spoke about, asana, which is what we consider yoga today, is actually just limb number 3. There's 8 limbs. And limb number 3 is the actual physical exercises. Limb number 1 and 2 are what we call the yamas and the niyamas. It's the do's and don'ts, how we live, 10 commandments. What's the first one? Non-violence. Truthfulness. Non-stealing. Well, non-stealing doesn't just mean that I don't actually walk into somebody else's cubicle and take their wallet out of their drawer. Non-stealing means that I'm giving fair wages. I'm not stealing what belongs to somebody else. That money that's going home in my pocket should be going home in their pocket because they've done the work for it. I'm not stealing credit. You gave a great example of not stealing credit. I'm not stealing people's time. Everybody's time is valuable, whether you're the CEO or in the mailroom. I'm not making my employees or my colleagues do mindless, idiotic things just to please me. I value their time. So under the shade of Dharma, and as we said, I began with non-violence, ahimsa, it's number 1. Well, violence doesn't just mean I'm not going out and, punching my coworkers. Are we importing things from violent conditions? Are we using products that are the products of violence? Has an animal suffered in the production of this item? Whether directly through actually giving it skin for this item, or through having its eyes or its skin smeared with chemicals to test our cosmetics. Have women and children in 3rd world countries suffered? Well, that's violence. Is our planet suffering? Are we using chemicals that are toxic, that are polluting the groundwater, such that people whose lives depend upon that water, when it ends up flowing into a river and then through their village that they drink, they get sick? 500 kilometers away from our factory, so we don't have any direct responsibility for it, but we've polluted the groundwater. Well, that's violence. You don't have to actually take a grenade and launch it into somebody's cubicle for it to count as violence in the workplace. So, again, it's going to depend on what your job is, what your position in the workplace hierarchy is. You can't give, a cookie cutter that's going to work for you that's going to be the same as a cookie cutter that's for him. But these are all ways of bringing that awareness in. And with the awareness of Brahma, is everything that I do something that I've done with an awareness of the divine that's out there watching me, and the divine in those with whom I'm interacting. Yeah.
Do you feel a sense of time pressure to introduce spirituality into business because of all the earth limits that we're shooting past in terms of climate change or biodiversity loss and resource use, that could be tipping points that aren't reversible?
Absolutely. He asked whether there's a sense of time urgency to bring spirituality into business because of what we're doing with the earth. Absolutely. The choices that we're making today, from big business down to the consumer, are choices of a separate world. I'm separate from you. And I'm separate from future generations. There's absolutely no way we could make the choices we're making today environmentally with any sense of a connection to our planet, with the people who live on this planet, with the people who are going to inherit this planet. But it's not all the fault of big business, big corporations, big government. The law of business says supply and demand. If, as consumers, we demand the lowest priced items, well, then there's going to be a competition. That's what a capitalist society is. There's going to be a competition amongst providers to provide the lowest cost item, because we all want to, if there's 50 brands of shampoo, and the way that we choose which brand we're going to buy is what's cheapest, then we've just continued a cycle of whatever the producer of that cheapest brand of shampoo is doing, he's going to keep doing it, and others are going to follow suit. And if what he's doing is employing people in horrendous conditions, testing the chemicals on the eyes of, bunny rabbits and monkeys and other animals all over the world, producing it in a factory, the waste from which is polluting the earth, made with thickeners that come out of unmentionable parts of cows and horses. Well, if that's what we want, that's what we're going to get. That's the law of supply and demand. So as consumers, we have a great responsibility to take a few extra minutes and read ingredients and do some research and find out. This is what we call meditation in action. Yoga in action. It's not like, let me do my grocery shopping as quickly as I can so I can go home and meditate. Let me bring my meditation into the grocery store. What's really the extra cost here? And the minute that we start demanding, they'll start supplying. That's the great thing about the capitalist model. So instead of screaming at corporations, our money speaks a lot louder. When I was in high school in California, it was at the time of apartheid still in South Africa, and there were, international pressure and sanctions against the South African government, and everybody was rallying and whatnot, and on corporations particularly to pull out of South Africa. And Coors Beer had refused to pull out of South Africa. It was way too profitable to keep working there. And so began a nationwide, it might have been international, I don't know, I was only in high school, boycott of Coors beer. And I mean, I remember being 16, 17, and not even a beer drinker, but I knew, that there was no way anybody who cared what anybody thought about them was going to be caught even looking at a can of Coors beer, let alone actually drinking one. And it worked. What pressure couldn't do, what sanctions couldn't do, economic pressure did. It no longer was profitable for them to stay in South Africa because nobody was buying their beer. And so if we as consumers brought spirituality into our consumption, the businesses, whether from a spiritual perspective or from a purely financial perspective, would absolutely have to follow suit, because that's where the money is. And so that's really our job as consumers, is to make sure that where the money is with sustainable, organic, free trade products, and to absolutely refuse to buy things that aren't. And yeah, it may mean spending a little bit more. It may mean going to a grocery store that's slightly farther away. It may mean doing without with something. But that's where our spiritual practice comes in.
Much of the wisdom literature suggests that you should balance a heart, body, mind and soul. And if you do, you live a better life. And I subscribe to that. But as in the sort of the muscle-bound Hulk who spends too much time at the gym, how do we balance our spiritual lives so we don't go too far overboard?
How do we balance our spiritual lives so we don't go too far overboard? There's no such thing as too far overboard spiritually. If what we're really living is spirituality. What I mean by that is, typically when we talk about going overboard, what it has to do with is too much time in meditation, too much energy-focused time dedicated to going on retreats, meditating, chanting, praying, whatnot. I'll tell you a great story, actually, in a few minutes. Puja Swamiji and I were in South Africa several years ago, and there's a family there who are wonderful devotees, very, very pious, very, very religious. And in the Indian spiritual tradition, in the Hindu tradition, there's a great emphasis on what we call puja, which is actually the ceremonial ritual doing of taking care of the divine in form and prayer. And but puja takes place seated in a temple. So people who do puja in their homes do it seated in the temple in their homes. So the family that we were staying with was very, very spiritual, spent lots and lots of time every day in puja. They had a huge temple room in their house. Their house was about 400 kilometers from Johannesburg. It's another city. But we were flying in and out of Johannesburg. And there's not an airport where they live, so you go by road. And the roads are very good, and you can get there in just a few hours. So on the day we were leaving, we were catching a flight, pretty early flight from Johannesburg. So we had to leave early in the morning from their house to get there on time. And the husband and wife are sitting in the temple room doing their puja, and an hour's gone, an hour and a half is gone, 2 hours gone. And now I'm starting to get really anxious because I'm watching the hours that we have to make it to the airport diminish. I mean, I had left certainly an extra window of time, but now not only is the window gone, but even the actual time we need is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And I would go in periodically and whisper in the man's ear, we're really getting late, we really should leave. And he kept saying, oh, don't worry, I'll get you there, I promise, we have to finish our puja. I'll get you there, I promise, we have to finish our puja. And it got so late and so late and so late. And when we finally left, but he, of course, he wasn't worried. He said, don't worry, I promise I'll get you there. And I knew we've got an hour and a half to do a 3.5 hour drive. So we get in the car and he proceeds to drive literally 250 kilometers an hour, 200 kilometers an hour. It was the scariest ride I've ever been on. Now it was a very flat, big highway, and he was in this big Mercedes car, so you didn't actually feel it, except that you knew he was going a ridiculous speed, and you're passing everybody. The other cars are like they're standing still. And we were terrified. And Puja Swamiji leans over in his beautiful and non-judgmental, but just leading you into a state of inquiry tone says, do you really think that God is going to be more happy with your extra hour of puja if you kill your guru on the way to the airport? Than if you had skipped the extra hour of puja. So, when we talk about going overboard, that's what we mean. Is when it's our box of spirituality to the exclusion of all else. Spirituality is performing my puja, it's not getting my guru safely to the airport. We're unable to see spirituality in the world. If you're really, really living it, then whether it's your guru in the car, or whether it's the people in the cars on the highway around you, you're able to see that same divine you were worshiping in the temple in that. And so, moving through the world, serving the world, becomes as much part of your spiritual practice as actually doing the puja sitting in your house. So you're not going to create situations where you are rushed and stressed and therefore mean to everybody around you, just so that you could have extra time meditating. But if that spiritual time is really bringing you an awareness of the self in others, of that union, then there's no such thing as overboard. Ultimately that's the goal of how we all should live, that 24 hours a day should be spiritual. Whatever I do, I should be doing it spiritually.
Thank you very much. I read a lot, well, not too much, but about how you actually come to your path. It would be great if you could share just a little bit of your story, because obviously you
We're going to have to set up another time. It's 9. I want to be, nonetheless, I want to be, Puja Swamiji always talks about time management, thought management, and tongue management. So I want to be conscious of people's time. It's a long story, but we have for everybody also books outside here that are for free for everyone. Books of Puja Swamiji's, brochures of the work that we're doing. And just before I get into your question, on Friday, actually this coming Friday from 12 to 2, we have a wonderful opportunity for spirituality in action, karma, yoga.